Welcome. This is Introduction to the Book of Daniel with Dr. Rachel Slutsky. I know most of you, I believe, have been here, but just a reminder to keep yourself muted when you're not actively speaking. And just remember then to unmute so we can hear you when you speak. You can also engage here on the chat. And with that, I'll just turn it to you, Dr. Slutsky, so we can begin with the class.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for that, Evie. It's really nice to see all of you. Thank you for coming and joining. Zella, you have a hand up.
Yes. Before we start, just 2 minutes, there is a fabulous poem written by Wallace Stevens in the 1920s, and it's called Peter Quince at the Clavier, and it's all about Susanna.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. Excellent.
And so I really recommend everyone taking a peek at it. It's beautiful poetry, and it's our heroine.
Amazing. Oh, very perfect. Very apropos for today. Thank you. Good. So that's exactly what we're going to come to. I just want to give a teeny bit of setup about where we've come in this course and what kind of the themes and questions we're thinking about today. In our first class, right, we had introduced and familiarized ourselves with the book of Daniel. We discussed where Daniel is in the setting, at least where is Daniel set in ancient Jewish history, this question about authorship and dating. We discussed the structure of the book and Perek Aleph, the first chapter. Our second class, we had discussed Daniel chapters 2 through 6, and we'd focused a lot on this question about Daniel as a prophet. He's some kind of visionary, some interpreter. He's able to interpret dreams. He's able to even have the vision of the dream itself. These are God-given miraculous abilities, according to the Sefer. He might be the mysterious fourth figure who rescues his friends from the fiery furnace. He and his three friends, Mishael, Hananiah, and Azariah, are all very righteous and continually stick to their monotheistic Jewish guns, even when they are faced with the threat of death from their Babylonian counterparts. Last class, we discussed Daniel chapters 7 through 12. We focused on Perek Zayin on chapter 7, and we discussed messianism in early Judaism. And we talked about the messianic nature of this chapter in particular, the way that it models a supernatural idea of the Messiah, one who is like a son of man. Right, this mysterious quasi-human who's given dominion and power and the ability to judge humanity. And we discussed this as a broader trend at the time. And this leads us into our final class. So today, what I want to do is to focus back again on this question, which we will in some ways leave open-ended, and in some ways I hope we'll have some more clarity on about, is Daniel a prophet? What is the function of this book in Tanakh? Is this some kind of last book of prophecy? Is this supposed to be kind of a sign-off from Tanakh of the last drop of prophecy in the period right before the Second Temple, in which we start to see prophecy completely not just disintegrate, disappear? Right. I think we discussed in our first class that we're going to have the return of the exiles back to Judea in the year 520 or 537 under the decree of Cyrus the Great. Okay. And that's all very lovely that they will return around that time. But we see that this new model of leadership that we could start to call them Jews, that these Jews have, their model of leadership is going to be around Ezra HaSofer, the scribe. They'll have leaders who are Kohanim, who are priests, and we don't see the Navi anymore. And here we've talked from class number 1 and on about how Daniel's never called a Navi. He has visions. It says that he will chazeh, that he will see things in the Aramaic, but it is mysterious about if he's an actual prophet. What I want to look at today are two, what are usually called additions to the book of Daniel. These are not preserved in our Tanakhs. Daniel 1 through 12 is what we have. However, pious Jews during the time of the Septuagint Okay, so around 250-ish BCE, we're a little bit unsure about the dating of the Septuagint, which is basically the Tanakh, but not entirely. It's slightly different, but essentially the Greek version of the Tanakh. It's partially different because it included some texts we don't include in our 24 books of the Hebrew Bible. And two of the things that are preserved in the Septuagint are the two additions to Daniel, the book of Susanna or Shoshana, and the stories of Bel and the dragon. Now, these are really, really interesting stories. They fit in, as we will see, very nicely with the rest of Tanakh, um, but they stand apart. This is partially because we don't have Hebrew or Aramaic versions of these texts. They only seem to have ever been composed in Greek. So many scholars agree that these texts probably come later than the texts of Daniel proper, of the 12 chapters we've looked at. They are preserved in the Septuagint, and that means that they're preserved in Catholic Bibles in the Old Testament. The Old Testament is in large part drawing on the Septuagint texts as opposed to our Tanakh, and therefore it's actually really thanks to that continued use by the Catholic Church that we have some of these early Jewish texts that the Jewish community did not preserve. So we have two Greek versions of these additions to Daniel. One that seems to be from the 3rd or 2nd century BCE, and then one from the 2nd century CE. And the canonical status of these two editions is debated, but is definitely not included in the Hebrew Bible. With all of that said, these editions are very important, and I want to frame them. We could read them in different ways. I want to focus primarily on the story of Susanna today. If there's time, we will touch on Bella and the Dragon. Bella and the Dragon are really, it's kind of a series of 3 mini stories that are very similar to what you've already seen in this course. Right, so that's part of why they're secondary for our purposes today. Very similar stories about Daniel and his friends being forced to commit idolatry, and ultimately them proving idols are false, our God is the real God, and we're going to stick up for what we believe in. Okay, so they're great hero stories. They're interesting. Daniel's very righteous, but they're very, very similar. They're kind of just like adding to the list of stories we saw in part 1 of the book of Daniel, chapters 2 through 6. Daniel and his friends are righteous. They prove those Babylonians wrong, and they are rescued and blessed for it. The book of Susanna is really interesting and different. And it is in part different because the camera is set on this woman, Susanna, and Daniel will save the day later on. But the whole positioning of the story is different. The protagonist is not Daniel, but we're going to see that Daniel is still kind of the hero of the story. And I also want us to think a lot about what this story is trying to tell us about the role of prophecy. This question we began the course with. What is the message of this story in terms of prophecy? So with that, I want to spend most of our times reading through this short story, which most of us have probably not encountered, which is interesting. The name Shoshana is not all that rare, right? But actually reading the story of Susanna is quite rare. So with that, I am going to bring up my source sheet and I'm going to share my screen, and you should have access to the source sheet as well, but I will share it and we will read it together. So here we go. Can someone begin reading for us the first section until that part, her alone, until the bolded title, the elders threaten Susanna? Someone read, it's verses 1 through 14 for us. Yeah, Zella, please.
I named my daughter Susanna after
Beautiful. Okay, so someone's a fan here already.
Okay.
Wonderful.
There was a man living in Babylon whose name was Joachim. He married the daughter of Hilkiah named Susanna, a very beautiful woman and one who feared the Lord. Her parents were righteous and had trained their daughter according to the laws of Moses. Joachim was very rich and had a fine garden adjoining his house. The Jews used to come to him because he was the most honored of them all. That year, 2 elders from the people were appointed as judges. Concerning them, the Lord had said, wickedness came forth from Babylon, from elders who were judges, who were supposed to govern the people. These men were frequently at Joachim's house, and all who had a case to be tried came to them there. When the people left at noon, Susanna would go into her husband's garden to walk. Every day, the 2 elders used to see her going in and walking about, and they began to lust for her. They suppressed their consciences and turned away their eyes from looking to heaven or remembering their duty to administer justice. Both were overwhelmed with passion for her, but they did not tell each other of their distress, for they were ashamed to disclose their lustful desire to have intercourse with her. Day after day, they watched eagerly to see her. One day they said to each other, let us go home, for it is time for lunch. So they both left and parted from each other. But turning back, they met again. And when each pressed the other for the reason, they confessed their lust. Then together they arranged for a time when they could find her alone.
Okay, very good. So yeah, it's not looking good. Um, so the story begins, right, with this idyllic couple who are above reproach, right? Joachim and Shoshana, right, or Susanna, right? They're beautiful. They revere God, right? The both man and woman seem to be very righteous, law-fearing, versed in the law of Moses. And excuse me, we have 2 elders who are judges. Okay. Now, this is interesting. I just want to point out some of the kind of inner biblical references, allusions, ideas that we have here. Right. On the one hand, this idea of having great judges, this is something that's really important in early Judaism. We're going to have the Sanhedrin. We're eventually going after this to have rabbinic Judaism, this very law-based, right, kind of, the foundation of Jewish life on some level becomes full of law and what is adjudicated by Bate Din, right, by these houses of law. At the same time, we might have in the back of our heads judges. The book of Judges has judges, right? And those judges don't do so well. That's really a story about total decline in Jewish leadership, right? And the necessity to have kings and prophets to help guide you. So we already have these 2 judges. We have this interesting aside in verse 5, right? That concerning them, the Lord had said, right? We kind of have this like warning from God. We don't know if this is a kind of after the story, God said this, but wickedness came forth from Babylon, from elders who were judges, who were supposed to govern the people. Okay, so keep your ears perked up. These judges are no good, and they were supposed to be the adjudicators of goodness. And what happens? This should be a bit reminiscent to a different story in Tanakh. What does this remind you of a little bit? That Susanna would go into her husband's garden to walk, and these men are watching her.
That's like Yosef with Potiphar's wife, in the
Oh, that's interesting. Though Yosef is not actually watching her.
No, but it's kind of like day by day, and then when no one's around, it's the same, like little.
That's a very nice comparison, right? Almost this inversion. There it was the predatory woman. Here it's the predatory men. Very good. What else might this remind you of?
David
Yeah,
and
there's also the
Bathsheba.
story of Hannah.
Michael, sorry.
David and Bathsheba.
Good, right? We also have David and Bathsheba, right? Again, this supposedly righteous man, this king of Israel, in power, very righteous, who is actually very much predatory, we could say, towards this righteous woman.
Oh, Amnon and Tamar.
Ah, interesting.
The idea of they're going to kind of plot against her.
Very interesting. Okay. Good. So I mean, we have a number of stories, right, that have to do with men, especially men you might assume to be righteous, who are predatory towards righteous women, right? So this is of a piece with that kind of genre and that kind of trope, we could say. Okay. These two men, they, unbeknownst to each other, they both are righteous judges who are both really desiring for this woman, so much so that they basically keep putting aside their righteous duty and they keep desiring and lusting after her and watching her. And one day they say, okay, bye, pal, I'm going to go home and eat lunch. And then they both come back. And ultimately they say, wait a minute, we're both back here. Why are you here? And they confess to each other. We're lusting after her. And now they decide to be co-conspirators. We want to wait for a time when she's alone. So let's keep reading verses 15 through 27. Can someone else read for us now this section? Yeah, Sherry, please.
Okay. Once, while they were watching for an opportune day, she went in as before with only two maids and wished to bathe in the garden, for it was a hot day. No one was there except the two elders, who had hidden themselves and were watching her. She said to her maids, "Bring me olive oil and ointments and shut the garden doors so that I can bathe." They did as she told them. They shut the doors of the garden and went out by the side doors to bring what they had been commanded. They did not see the elders because they were hiding. When the maids had gone out, the two elders got up and ran to her. They said, "Look, the garden doors are shut and no one can see us. We are burning with desire for you, so give your consent and lie with us. If you refuse, we will testify against you that a young man was with you, and this was why you sent your maids away." Susanna groaned and said, "I'm completely trapped, for if I do this, it will mean death for me. If I do not, I cannot escape your hands. I choose not to do it. I will fall into your hands rather than sin in the sight of the Lord." Then Susanna cried out with a loud voice, and the two elders shouted against her. And one of them ran and opened the garden doors. When the people in the house heard the shouting in the garden, they rushed in at the side door to see what had happened to her. And when the elders told their story, the servants felt very much ashamed, for nothing like this had ever been said about Susanna.
Okay. All right. So now things start to get ugly, right?
Mm.
And now we really have a nice parallel with Bathsheba, right? She's bathing. Here we also have Shoshana's bathing. And what happens? These men come and they really, really paint her into a corner. So can someone just like reiterate what's basically the scenario they present to her? Yeah, Emily. Oh, you're muted.
With us, or if you refuse, we will, destroy your reputation. We'll testify that you have slept with a young man, and the implication is, who will believe you?
Good, very good, right? So they who are held in, above repute basically say to her, this is your choice. Either commit adultery and sleep with us, or don't commit adultery and we'll tell everyone that you committed adultery. Right? You are in a really bad situation and we are the people most respected who are going to basically ruin you.
Mm.
So she realizes this is a real, I don't know if catch 22 is the right term. She's stuck though. It's a total pickle, right? And she just cries out. She's not willing to do either of these bad things. And ultimately, she knows what she would prefer is her reputation destroyed, but to actually not commit adultery. And in this case, she's trying to prevent herself essentially becoming, interestingly, it's a little unclear, like if she doesn't agree, would they rape her, right? they're asking for her consent on some level, right? They say, we're burning with desire for you, so give your consent and lie with us. Okay. But essentially what they're saying is have sex with us or we'll do something else. So there is this kind of like threat behind it. Right.
It
She
feels
doesn't
like
really
they're
have
almost
the freedom to give consent.
it feels
What's
like they're almost creating this perfect halachic situation. You have two kosher adim. Why is there two people and not just one? Well, maybe for that. You know, if she cries out because it's not in the field, right? So then it's not rape. And so it's like they're literally creating this perfect halachic situation. And so I know it's just cool.
Very, very good. Okay, you are anticipating some of the trouble. Exactly. Okay, you got two good guys, two kosher adim, these witnesses who are judges themselves. You have this scenario about crying out or not and who will hear her. Good. Keep that in the back of your minds. Very good. Ultimately, she cries out. The men basically tell everyone this is what happened, as they threatened they would. She is actually trying to sleep with someone else, right? This is terrible. And everyone is totally shocked. They can't believe the most righteous woman in town would do such a bad thing. Okay, so let us continue with verse 28, and we will read to verse 46. And again, notice we still don't have Daniel here, which is an interesting lacuna in the story so far. Can someone keep reading for us? Yeah, Beth, please.
The next day, when the people had gathered at the house of her husband Joachim, the two elders came, full of their wicked plot to have Susanna put to death. In the presence of the people, they said, "Send for Susanna, daughter of Hilkiah, the wife of Joachim." So they sent for her, and she came with her parents, her children, and all her relatives. Now, Susanna was a woman of great refinement and beautiful in appearance. As she was veiled, the scoundrels ordered her to be unveiled so that they might feast their eyes on her beauty. Those who were with her and all who saw her were weeping. Then the two elders stood up before the people and laid their hands on her head. Through her tears, she looked upward toward heaven, for her heart trusted in the Lord. The elders said, "While we were walking in the garden alone, this woman came in with two maids, shut the garden doors, and dismissed the maids. Then a young man who was hiding there came to her and was intimate with her. We were in a corner of the garden, and when we saw this wickedness, we ran to them. Although we saw him have intercourse with her, we could not hold the man because he was stronger than we, and he opened the doors and got away. We did, however, seize this woman and ask who the young man was, but she would not tell us. These things we testify." Because they were elders of the people and judges, the assembly believed them and condemned her to death. Then Susanna cried out with a loud voice and said, "O eternal God, you know what is secret and are aware of all things before they come to be. You know that these men have given false evidence against me, and now I am to die, though I have done none of the wicked things that they have charged against me." The Lord heard her cry. Just as she was being led off for execution, God stirred up the Holy Spirit of a young man named Daniel, and he shouted with a loud voice, "I want no part in shedding this woman's blood."
Okay. All right. So great. Miriam, you had anticipated before, right, that we have these people now giving testimony, right? And they set up this story in which we are the two witnesses, but there's no other witness. We're telling you there was this guy, she did sleep with him, but he got away. We were just, he was too strong for us. And otherwise, we would have, of course, brought him to all of you to tell you that this is a bad guy as well, but we're here to tell you she did this terrible thing, and adulterous women, they're supposed to be murdered. So right, we should also have in the back of our minds this notion of sota, right, the adulterous wife, right, which becomes a big deal uh, been also eventually in rabbinic literature, there's kind of this fascination with the possibilities for how you would prosecute an adulterous woman. So they basically say, I think that this is an open and shut case. We're going to have to go execute her. And no one seems to object, right? Because they were elders of the people and judges, the assembly believed them until we have this young man named Daniel. Just a small note here, as there's a debate about where this text was supposed to be positioned in relation to the book of Daniel. Did the author of this, it's assumed that this, again, was written in Greek, separate from the original 12 chapters of Daniel. Did the author want this to come at the end? Like, this is a nice add-on, which is how it's usually arranged. This is an addition to the book of Daniel. Or is this actually supposed to be a pre-Daniel, a prequel to the book of Daniel? This is actually your first introduction to this young man named Daniel. Kind of assumes in verse 45, we've never met him before. So I don't know which is more compelling, that it goes in the beginning or the end, but it's this kind of reintroduction to our hero who says, I want no part in shedding this woman's blood. Interesting. Okay, so what happens now? We finally have Daniel come around, and this is really the last part of the story. So can someone read for us verse 47 through the end?
I can read.
Great.
All the people turned to him and asked, "What is this you are saying?" Taking his stand among them, he said, "Are you such fools, O Israelites, as to condemn a daughter of Israel without examination and without learning the facts? Return to court, for these men have given false evidence against her." So all the people hurried back, and the rest of the elders said to him, "Come, sit among us and inform us, for God has given you the standing of an elder." Daniel said to them, "Separate them far from each other, and I will examine them." When they were all separated from each other, he summoned one of them and said to him, "You old relic of wicked days, your sins have now come home, which you have committed in the past, pronouncing unjust judgments, condemning the innocent, and acquitting the guilty. Though the Lord said, 'You shall not put an innocent or unrighteous person to death.' Now then, if you really saw this woman, tell me this. Under what tree did you see them being intimate with each other?" He answered, "Under a mastic tree." And Daniel said, "Very well, this lie has cost you your head, for the angel of God has received the sentence from God and will immediately cut you in two." And then putting him to one side, he ordered them to bring the other. And he said to him, "You offspring of Canaan and not of Judah, beauty has beguiled you, and your lust has perverted your heart. This is how you have been treating the daughters of Israel, and they were intimate with you through fear. But a daughter of Judah would not tolerate your wickedness. Now then, tell me, under which tree did you catch them being intimate with each other?" He answered, "Under an evergreen oak." Daniel said to him, "Very well, this lie has cost you also your head, for the angel of God is waiting with his sword to split you in two so as to destroy you both." Then the whole assembly raised a great shout and blessed God, who saves those who hope in him. And they took action against the two elders, because out of their own mouths Daniel had convicted them of bearing false witness. They did to them as they had wickedly planned to do to their neighbor. Acting in accordance with the law of Moses, they put them to death. Thus innocent blood was spared that day. Hilkiah and his wife praised God for their daughter Susanna, and so did her husband Joachim and all her relatives, because she was found innocent of a shameful deed. And from that day onward, Daniel had a great reputation among the people.
Great, thank you.
So there we have, like, it's really refers back to biblical law, Edim Zomimim.
Good. Okay, so there we have,
Exactly.
these are
Exactly. I'm
false
thinking the same
witnesses.
thing. Exactly the
Sorry,
same
Michael?
thing. I was thinking exactly the same thing. Adam Zollman look very similar. It's not quite exactly like Adam Zollman, but it's very close.
Very good. Okay, you have these bad ADIM, right? These people, they tested falsely. They will be put to death, not the alleged adulteress. Okay, and interestingly, right, this turns into really prosecuting the bad ADIM, not, excuse me, not prosecuting the alleged Sota, right, which is interesting. They really, ultimately, her reputation remains intact, and they don't even go so far as to kind of blame or question the victim. Once Daniel comes on the scene, he rules out that she could have done this terrible thing. So let's talk about this a little bit, though, right? On the one hand, what Daniel does is great. We'd like to think that basically all witnesses are questioned, and you try to have corroborating evidence to make sure the witnesses are telling the truth. And there does seem to be this issue here that the witnesses are the judges, right? So that's not great. On the other hand, fine, the righteous judges, right? This is an ideal scenario in which no one would usually ever question these witnesses. And there seems to be this element in my reading of this story, in which, on the one hand, Daniel models good common sense. Wait a minute, let's interrogate these witnesses further. The witnesses should not also be the judges, and we have to ask more questions before we sentence a woman to death, right? Like, he's modeling an improvement to their justice system. Great. Any other righteous guy could have done that. On the other hand, Emily, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I'm wondering, he seems to be really referring pretty directly to like the ideal biblical, I mean, not exactly, not precisely the ideal biblical model of interrogating the witnesses. And if you might, I don't know, again, I don't know when you were, there seems to be a 400-year uncertainty about when this was actually written, but you're already in the period of the development of rabbinic law, which talks a lot about how witnesses are interrogated, and I'm not so familiar with it, but I have, he seems to be not just exercising common sense. He seems to me to be correcting in, a feature of, a corrupted version of justice that exists in their society. And he seems to be, looking back to the ideal model, the ideal biblical model.
Very good. Okay, Emily, so I think you've really fleshed out option number one for how to read this story. Option number one is that Daniel wants to improve, maybe, or restore, we could say, this system of law that apparently these Jews are operating with, in which you really, yes, you should have two witnesses and two male witnesses in this model. And really, he's saying, and you need to interrogate each of them. Right. He essentially serves as some kind of judge to do extra interrogation. Like, they can't be, every part of the court. There should be some kind of third party that investigates the witnesses. The witnesses, it can't just be they come forth and say, we agree with each other. Pull them apart and see that they know the
Right.
same facts. Right. Great. This is, Daniel or some other great person who had a good sense of justice and saw corruption in their legal system could have done the job. What's a second way to read this story and the role of Daniel? Yeah, Sherry?
Well, I just wanted one observation that it's very odd when talking about witnesses that they don't, of course, to modern sensibility, they didn't call the maids of Susanna, who could have said, well, she just sent us out to get olive. She didn't send us to get rid of us. She just sent us to get the bathing things that she needed. But that's
Good.
not even an option.
Yeah, that's interesting. Right. Right. And I mean, this is really like an abbreviated story, right? Like you have, could ask a lot of questions about the maids or the family members who all kind of come in mourning with her. We kind of have a lot of these like, almost these like Greek choruses in this story, right? You have like the group of the maids, the group of the family members. None of them are interrogated. There's no character witnesses or things like that. Good. It's very distilled down into the two people making the accusation.
I just wanted to ask, I mean, I don't know if it applied at this time, but women were not supposed to be witnesses, that weren't accepted as witnesses. So I'm not sure if that applied in this time, biblical time, but that is not in the rabbinical time, it was not accepted.
Good. Right. So I think that that might be the simplest explanation is that like the maids wouldn't qualify, but also I think it's supposed to be that the way that these guys frame the role of the maids is, listen, they have nothing to say because they left before this happened, right? Which on some level is true. So they're saying, listen, the maids won't be able to tell you anything because we're the only people who saw the sex actually happen, right? The maids are out of the picture. So yeah, Zella.
What's interesting is everyone is shocked because of, they know this woman to be a good person. But it seems to occur to anybody, well, maybe something is going on with these two others, because all of a sudden she's totally out of character. And when Daniel says, I cannot allow this to happen, all of a sudden we see him interject. It seems very personal. All of a sudden he's going to save the day. Instead of saying, wait, we must restore justice, it's, I cannot allow this to happen, which, to me is a little filled with ego, but that's Daniel.
Well, right. And I mean that is a really helpful segue, Zella, I think, into the second way to read the story, right? Which is it's not that Daniel pops up and says, hold on, let's improve the legal system. I want to make sure, extra sure before we kill this woman that she did the deed. He seems to pop up and say, I know she didn't do it. And now let's, go back, retrace our steps, and figure out how she didn't do it. Emily, okay, nice job, right? In the sense of restoring justice, Daniel seems like a biblical prophet. Okay, so I think this is the second way to read the story. Option number one is Daniel's a really smart guy, and we should try to be like Daniel. We should be critical thinkers. We should make sure our justice system lives up to everything it should live up to. We should be extra careful not to put innocent people to death. Option number two is no, the point of this story is everyone did everything right except for these two lying witnesses slash judges. But the fact that everyone believed them and the fact that they were willing to carry out a death sentence makes sense. They were following good kind of, good biblical law, and only a prophet could have saved the day. Only Daniel, who somehow divinely knew Susanna was innocent, could have intervened. But had you not had a prophet there, she would have died. There was no way around this. This was actually a perfect legal system. And it was only because of prophecy that you had a way to save an innocent woman's life. Yeah, Beth.
You know what I find kind of ironic is that the particular story that the elders cooked up was that she was having sex with a young man. It's like they almost conjured him up themselves, because then a young man, Daniel, appears and says, hey, wait a minute. And so they're kind of almost hoisted on their own petard here. Um, it could have been any man, presumably, but they chose to say a young man, and then the young man appears. I just think it's kind of an interesting plot twist.
Yeah, that's a very nice kind of literary thing, right? They think, a young man will be her undoing, and a different young man is actually her salvation. Very nice point. So I guess I'm wondering, I mean, which read of the story is more compelling to you? And yeah, Emily, you were going to say something? I
I'm
can't,
not so sure. Oh, I'm sorry.
now I hear you. Now we
I'm
hear.
not so sure that they're in my way of understanding it, and I see how you're thinking, and maybe it's just in how, there's different ways of understanding what a prophet is. And I have to read it more carefully. In other words, God definitely intervenes, right? I think the role of the book is definitely wants us to view God as, as the intervening. But does it say that God kind of puts the words in Daniel's mouth? I'm not sure. When I said, in the sense of restoring justice, he seems like a biblical prophet, I'm thinking more of the prophets who like critiqued,
Hmm.
Israelite society, you know, who critique the elites for being corrupt and critiqued society that where, vulnerable people couldn't get equal justice. And they're hearkening back to biblical, the idealized biblical notions of and laws about justice. And he is too. So I don't, in other words, I'm not seeing them as totally different, as totally opposing each other. The two
Yeah.
models.
Okay, that's a very nice point, right? That maybe right, we have different aspects to what the prophet is supposed to be. A prophet is one who preaches about justice. Really, most of the time, actually, right? Daniel is in some ways like a deviation in this model of like the prophet is a fortune teller. Like, yes, prophets in the Bible do often like have aspects of foresight that they're given, but a lot of it is like rebuke, right? They have a strong moral compass, and that's their role. So that's a very nice point that both of these, right, interpretations or reads of the story, are on the same hinge of Daniel as prophet, either as the one who can kind of miraculously know the truth, or the one who has a good moral compass and doesn't know the truth, but knows that this is not a sufficient justice system as it stands in the story.
And I don't. I'm reading it in English. We're reading it in English as translated from Greek.
Yeah.
So but it does seem he does seem to be clearly alluding to explicit biblical verses. Although I'm not sure about that. But is that true?
To this notion you mean about like the
Like
woman who's raped in the
separating,
field and two witnesses? Yeah,
yeah, two witnesses, separating the witnesses and the edim zomimim. Those are pretty, so like it seems to be the book wants us to see Daniel as a continuation of,
sure.
biblical, law and biblical ideals.
Good,
I
good.
have a question. I just in general, so why was this not included in Tanakh? Why, if we read the story, we know the prophecy, apostle, but why was this not concluded? What is it
Yeah.
about this that it was not included?
So this is a very good question. That question is probably better than I personally have an answer for. I think some of this, it might be that this was, number one, depending on the dating, perhaps this was a little bit later and there's already this like text that was accepted into Tanakh called the Book of Daniel. And this was separate. I mean, your question is better than my answer because we could really ask this about additions to Daniel or any other text that's preserved in the Septuagint and subsequently the Old Testament that's left out of Tanakh. I don't have a great answer for why these don't make the cut. Um, it's a great question, though. Um, so let's put a bit of a pin in that. Beth, you had your hand up.
Speaking of, as we just were a moment ago about being translated from the Greek, it got me wondering there in a couple of different places in the story, we have the phrase the Lord, and then we also have God.
Mhm.
And I was just wondering, I mean, it's pretty common in English Bibles that when you see the Lord, that's how they're translating the Tetragrammaton. And I
Mhm.
just wonder if what the Greek equivalent of Yud He Vav He is, and if that's what in fact was used in the Greek original.
That's a really good question. I have to double check. Usually the Septuagint uses the word kurios for Lord for the Tetragrammaton. So it's very possible that that's being preserved here. And it's possible that it's an imitation of biblical style, right? The author of this is trying to make this like a biblical book that uses both these names for God. So that's a very good possibility. But yeah, good question. I have to look at the Greek for this. So I think what's crucial about this story that fits nicely, I think puts it maybe in kind of stark colors what we've raised from our first class and onward about the book of Daniel is really this question of prophecy. Is Daniel a prophet? And what is it significant that the text uses the term Israelites and Judah? Oh, good question. Well, here it uses here it's certainly right. It praises Judah as opposed to Canaan. Let's pause. It's possible. I want to just finish this thought and then we can go to that. I think that part of what is going on here, though, is Daniel as a book is in some sense this negotiation that we see happening in the form of this narrative about the cessation of prophecy, the ending of this model of leadership, right? And Daniel is, in some sense, you could argue, I mean, I think the most radical argument you could make is that the book of Daniel is really this argument that prophecy does continue in exile and prophecy does need to go on. And in some sense, right, Daniel is this kind of holdout, and that without prophecy, bad things happen. There's no way to really replace the prophet because and again, this is more the reading of Daniel has this sixth sense, right? That he's able to know Susanna's innocent, or that perhaps there's a serious gap. I think the gentlest reading, the strongest reading is prophecy has to continue, or at least without the prophet, we're all lost, and it's the situation's hopeless. Or perhaps it's without prophecy, the onus falls to people to be extra discerning. The rest of us have to not take wonderful judges at face value or righteous witnesses at face value, right? There's a big gap that needs to be filled by the rest of us. And there's kind of an extra task on the day-to-day Jew without having that leadership. Zella, were you going to say something?
No, no, I was thinking about where are stories where women are abused and there is no hero. And I was just thinking like Ellie's sons stole, the holy food and did something with the women who were outside the the Mishkan. It's not clear what they do with these women, or even Amnon raping Tamar, and nothing seems, eventually Absalom kills him, but this is kind of a nice story because it has a happy ending, and these women are somewhat, they're protected and they're exonerated.
But can I,
I just want to say one thing to jump in, and then Emily, I see you. I was just going to say I think that's very interesting, and in some ways, what you're raising is also this kind of counterexample of even in times of prophecy, terrible things happen. Not just false accusations, the actual rape or the actual murder does happen. Prophecy is not actually a panacea that solves all problems. So perhaps it's a false dichotomy of like, if you have a prophet, everything will be good. So that's a really nice kind of complicating counterfactual there. Very good. Yeah, Emily.
I think Zella's example is really important because there was nobody to protect those women from the sons of Eli in the moment. However, that story is told in the Tanakh I think, to explain the need for Samuel, who was a great prophet. So there wasn't first, I mean, God didn't intervene on behalf of the women, but God calls out, right? God is very angry at them, and God punishes the sons of Eli. And that's the backdrop for the need for a new great prophet. So in a sense, it is connected to prophecy.
Good. Yeah, that's also a very nice point, right? Showing the gap when you don't have that kind of good leadership.
Yeah.
Good.
And
Michael,
then,
were you going to say something?
I was just saying, I was going to say, without prophecy, we have Hester Panim. We don't know why things happen. Maybe that's the duty of a prophet. Bad things happen, but we're not sure why. Maybe at the time of prophecy, maybe we have a more clear understanding of why bad things happen.
So it's interesting. I mean, speaking about things being hidden or revealed, right? Susanna says something just to that effect. What does she say when she is accused? She just cries out. These are kind of her final words. She cried out with a loud voice in verse 42 and said, "O eternal God, you know what is secret and are aware of all things before they come to be. You know that these men have given false evidence against me." Right? It's interesting, right? That her only recourse at that point is to basically say, God, you are the only person. Right? She's functioning in a world in which she doesn't know. Perhaps there's a prophet, right, who actually also knows that she's innocent. She just turns to God and says, "You know that I'm innocent. If no one else does, at least God will actually know the truth." Um, which also is interesting to think about this book and the book of Esther. Also, Esther is a book that also lacks a prophet, but is this exilic Persian period, like, what kind of leadership do Jews have to determine, to save innocent lives, whether it's to save the Jews en masse who have been condemned to death, or to save an individual righteous woman who's been condemned to death. And there it's interesting, right? You don't have like Daniel swooping in to save the day. Though I should say parenthetically, if we want to talk about interesting differences in the Septuagint, it is, and perhaps this could be another course for another time, looking at Megillat Esther and looking at the book of Esther and additions to Esther in the Septuagint preserved in the Old Testament. We do see actually God and miraculous dreams and communication with God come into that version. But what we have is, that strange conversation between Mordecai and Esther, where he says, maybe this is actually why you were made the queen, is so that you can save us. And if you don't save the rest of us, someone else will come along, right? These kind of strange, like, declarations of faith, one could say, that have this air to them of almost like, I know something, right? Or I have this insight that perhaps you're supposed to do this thing, you're here for a reason. So I think these texts are kind of serving this similar function, grasping for, who leads the Jewish people. Number one, who leads the Jewish people in the diaspora? And what happens when you don't have a prophet? Right? And that second point looms very large even when they return to Judea, that there is no prophet within the land of Israel, right? It becomes a new reality post 586 and the destruction of the Second Temple for Jews diasporically and within the land, in both scenarios. So I think this is maybe a good stopping point. We're not going to get to Bella and the Dragon. It's very familiar territory to our second class, so feel free to read it. It's in your source sheet. Are there more comments, questions, though, about this or the book of Daniel, or anything else? Yeah, Beth.
Yeah, I pulled off my shelf a copy of the New English Bible, which was new, 40 years ago or so. And one of the things I noticed in it was there's also this little bit of poetry called the Song of the Three, which was inserted in the Greek version of the book of Daniel, it says.
Yeah, that's interesting. I forgot about that. That's right. There is this, which again also turns the camera that time on Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, these three friends of Daniel, and it's a story of their righteousness and prayers.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Can everyone hear me clearly? By the way, someone is mowing their lawn outside. There's the windows open. Good.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, you're quite audible.
Great. Excellent. I'll just say also that like this studying these additions to the book of Daniel, I think should also heighten our interest in these books and texts that might not have been canonized, that for like later readers, right, we might say like it's not authoritative, but to remember that Jews during the time of these books, they, some people have talked about, and I think this is a helpful image, that they're not walking around with a codex like we have, right? And anything between these two covers is my Bible. They have scrolls, individual scrolls on their shelf, right? And you might have the book of Susanna on your shelf. And that's part of like this thing called holy texts to you. And maybe it's on my shelf, maybe it's not. That if we're really kind of thinking about what early Jews thought as authoritative, it's not this clear-cut line between the 12 chapters of Daniel were in, Bel and the Dragon and the Book of Susanna were out. This text, was holy literature, certainly to a number of Jews, and that's why it was prominent enough to be in the Septuagint and eventually accepted by the church. And with that, I think this is a good stopping point. Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity to learn with all of you. I hope we'll get to do it again soon. And
Thank you
thank
very
you, Evie
much.
and
It's
Teresa, for making this
very
possible.
interesting. Very
Thank
interesting.
you.
Thank
This
you,
was
Dr.
wonderful.
Slutsky.
Thank you so
Very,
much.
very interesting.
Thank you
you.
so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Slutsky, and thank you so much for everyone who participated in the class. Just a reminder that registration is now open for our Sefer Razman classes. They're starting after Pesach. You can see the class offerings as usual at drisha.org/classes. And also just a reminder that recordings are available for the classes, so you can always, I believe it's on the YouTube channel, but you can email the office to find that information if you're having trouble finding them. And again, it was so nice to learn together. Thank you again, Dr. Slutsky, and I'm wishing everyone a great day and a happy Pesach, and
Thank you
hopefully
so
we'll be
much.
together soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Lehitraot.
להתראות.